Welcome to the Ed Leaders Edge podcast, where we interview innovators and thought leaders in the field of education who are helping students thrive. I'm your host, Ed Madison. I'm a professor and researcher at the University of Oregon, an educational consultant, and serve as executive director of the Journalistic Learning Initiative, a nonprofit organization that empowers elementary, middle, and high school students to discover their voice, improve academic outcomes, and become self-directed learners through project-based storytelling. Welcome to our program. Well, welcome back to the podcast. Jack Smith has a long and distinguished track record as an education leader. He is an educational consultant and the former superintendent of the Montgomery County school system in Maryland. He has served as interim state superintendent in Maryland, deputy superintendent, and has just a long and really great career to talk about. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. We were chatting just briefly just a few days ago, and we're talking about how do we just make sure that all students, you said all means all, when it comes to just supporting our students to reach benchmarks and reach their potential. Tell me about just your philosophy around that.
Well, I think, and rightly so, in the last 3 decades, certainly with quite a bit of intensity, we've paid attention to different student populations, students in poverty, students of color, students who are English learners, students who receive special education services. So we wind up listing them all off, and we wind up with these long lists, when I think what we ought to be saying is that we're going to reach every single student, and we're going to take care of their well-being needs, and we're especially going to focus on their learning needs so that they can get that high school diploma and then have that first good step out of high school. And so we have to pay attention to student populations, and then the second step is to pay attention to every student in every population.
Yes, and you were mentioning that it's important that teachers really know their students, which I think is to some degree easier at the elementary level where you have students all day long. But when you get to secondary and you may be teaching 6 or 7 periods, it's a little bit more difficult. But tell me just a little bit more about that in terms of how some of the strategies that maybe teachers can use and even principals to sort of instill that value.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing we do, and it sounds silly and simple, but it's not, and that is, while we should have very good curricular standards and materials, we have to remember every day, every hour, we're teaching students, not math. We're teaching students, not English. And we're teaching English to students and math and history and PE, but we're teaching human beings. So when I first started teaching in 1980, in Washington State, I had up to 175 students a day. And so I understand that. I understand those teachers in a middle school who see all of the 7th graders in a rotating schedule for art. But really focusing on the fact that we know their names, we spend the time to learn something about them and make sure they learn something about us, that while we need to challenge and encourage and push, that we remember we're the adults in the room. And that we teach them, there's an old saying that you have to give respect to get respect. That's not true in a school. You give respect as a model, as an adult, all the time. And then you say to students, and I'm going to expect you to respect me. And I'm always going to respect you. And we're going to work together so you can be successful in this class, in this program, in this subject area. So I think really learning how to talk to students as a professional adult. They're not my friends. They're not my enemies. They are my students, and I have to care for them and care about their learning. And I think instilling that mindset in the professionals, superintendents, principals, teacher leaders, teachers, everyone, staff across the building, is a huge change. And I've seen a lot of schools that do that, and I've seen schools that don't. And there's a big difference, where everybody knows your name and where no one knows your name.
We are continue to read about shortages in terms of teaching professionals. I think that it's fair to say that just between just all the politicizing and everything else that's gone on, it's been more difficult to keep some of our teachers. I think some of them during COVID, the stats were that just a large percentage of teachers just kind of left the profession. How do we maybe change the sort of public narrative about the teaching profession? I sometimes say that, I think you told me that your wife had been a journalist. I think journalism and education sort of suffers from the same plight, is that people just kind of don't necessarily understand and even appreciate their roles in our society in terms of compensation and all kinds of things.
Right. Well, I definitely think it's incumbent upon the educational organizations, whether you're talking about the 13,500 or 600 school systems across the country, whether you're talking about the teachers associations, the principal associations, the parent associations, the superintendent associations, to come together and to work together, not to glamorize or idolize educators, but to say this is a challenging, difficult job that has tremendous rewards. And we're going to do it well on behalf of your children. And we're going to call upon you as the family members to be partners in that and really push that message every day, all the time. And then really push on school boards and state boards and other organizations, advocacy organizations, that we absolutely have to work to keep every student in school and engaged and with us. But we're not going to allow a student to be unsafe for the student's safety or other students' safety or adults' safety. We're not going to kick them out and send them away, but we're going to find a setting that will work for that student. Because too often these extreme stories become what people think of as the norm. And we've allowed that to happen, maybe for good intentions, but we've got to go back to a safe, orderly, and learning-centered environment where the students understand the expectations and they're also treated with great care and great encouragement and great support. But we're going to find a place for you, Ed, my student, but it may not be in this class of 25 other students for the coming days, because it's not safe for you or the other students to be here.
And we have seen a rise in alternative schools and programs that just kind of have a modified schedule or a different approach that works for certain students, where the typical regular classroom doesn't work for others. I think you had mentioned to me that you had a teacher who introduced you to, was it debate?
Yes, Mrs. Clark, Ann Clark in Washington State.
Yeah. And made that significant impression on you.
Let's step away from our conversation for a moment for me to tell you about the Journalistic Learning Initiative's innovative educational tools and services. If you're looking to make the best decision for your teaching staff and students about AI adoption, improving student engagement, strengthening writing skills, promoting social media mindfulness, or enhancing college and career readiness, please take a moment to visit our website at journalisticlearning.org. Our team of University of Oregon researchers offer customized AI tools, instructional materials, professional development, and consulting. Research confirms that students with journalistic learning experience outperform their peers on numerous key indicators for college and career readiness. At the heart of our work is empowering learners to become effective communicators. If you think about it, effective communication is critical in every human interaction, whether it's writing an essay for a grade or being interviewed to secure employment. Since 2015, JLI has benefited nearly 20,000 students and served schools in 15 states and the District of Columbia. I invite you to schedule an appointment to explore how JLI can improve your students' learning outcomes. Now back to our program.
Without a doubt, I was a scruffy, scrawny, 15-year-old 10th grader, and people didn't know my name. I came from a family where no one had graduated from high school, let alone college, and that most of my family members, my parents and most of the family members, were dropouts. And the kind of saving grace in my life was I liked to read. So I spent all my time in the library. And nobody cared that I liked to read. They didn't encourage it. They didn't discourage it. It was just what I liked. And Ann Clark was my English teacher in 10th grade, and she noticed that. And she wanted to start a debate team in the school. And she came and said, Jack, I want you to join the debate team. And I said, what's a debate team? And she said, well, you'll learn that, but first we have to get your parents to agree to that. And Ed, she changed my life by exposing me to a whole different way of thinking and a whole set of experiences around research and public speaking and all of those sorts of things that I had had zero experience with and exposure to.
Mm-hmm. You know, it makes me think, given your years in education and mine as well, all these sort of technological advances are supposed to usher in sort of this era of utopia, and yet you think of what's lost. I mean, I think I read something recently where actually more people are reading books again, physical books, than Kindle. Mm-hmm. There is that sort of sense of being able to earmark something or highlight or go back to something, and that gets lost on a tablet or on a digital experience. And I'm just curious your thoughts about that, given all your years.
Well, back in the 80s, I was put as a young teacher leader and then as a young administrator on a strategic planning committee in my school system in Washington State. And this was kind of a new way of thinking in the 80s, at least for school systems, strategic planning. And we read a book called Megatrends by John Nesbitt. Oh. And you remember that book? And he said,
yes, of course.
The tech is going to go crazy in the coming decades. And it has. And he said lots of things that have actually come true if you go back and read that book. But one of the things he said is, as the tech goes crazy, we as human beings, and especially as leaders in fields of government and education and business and economics and everything, we've got to remember that when you have higher tech, you have to have higher touch. High tech, high touch. So you think about the telephone issue. When phones first came in, we in education took no phones anywhere, ever, never, ever. Then after a few years of utter misery, and I was a principal at that time, and then I became a superintendent at that time, we kind of said, oh, what the heck? Let's just let them have their phones because we're tired of dealing with this. I hope as AI grows and as these other emerging technologies and these things that are coming upon us right now, we take a more balanced, prudent approach. We're not going to have it all the time, everywhere, a free-for-all. We're also not going to ban it. How can we use it for our mission of making sure you, Ed, my 10th grade student, are ready for the next great step of your life when you graduate from high school? And I hope that's the conversation that's going on. I'm not sure it is, given that I've worked with, a couple of hundred different school systems in the last 3 years since I left the superintendency. But I hope that's where we get to quickly, and we don't have to do this pendulum whiplash thing of no phones, all phones, and now we're starting to say, you know what? There are ways to deal with this. We can put the phone in a bag, we can take it out when we want to use it, we can do these things. And so, but it shouldn't take us 15 years, 18 years to do that.
Well, I think the opportunity with AI is that, it allows us to actually teach students how to develop specialized tools to kind of get into the back end there, and that's going to be a very important skill going forward, to be able to understand how to, which prompts are more effective and all that kind of thing. Those are the kids who are going to excel in emerging professions that we don't even know exist today.
So. Absolutely. I wish I were teaching high school or middle school English right now, because I have all these ideas about how to use AI in assignments to help students be stronger writers, better readers, better thinkers, and better at asking questions that I don't have any place to use. I maybe should go sign up to teach in my new life here in Maine and just try them out, because I think it's a huge possibility if we do it right.
Yeah. And, you're talking about the debate, and I think we had touched on this too when we spoke, that skill set of being able to stand on your feet and articulate thoughts and advocate or, be persuasive. Those are some of the things that some of the speech communications courses that we just don't emphasize anymore.
Right.
Is somewhat of a loss for students. We've got a lot of students. I mean, try teaching journalism to students who don't want to use the phone. I've been there. It's like, I don't know how that works, and you get responses like, well, I send them an email and I say, well, how many emails do you respond to from people that you've never met before? Right. None. Well, there you go.
Yeah. How do you do a really good interview via text? You just don't get the human part. The high touch part is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And this brings up another question that I've been talking to some other folks about. And it's a question of whether or not post-COVID, we are still having the same level of expectations that we had for kids before. I think that understandably, there are mental health challenges that are persistent now that maybe weren't as persistent, or maybe they were undiagnosed, years ago. But there is going to be an expectation, or even maybe the potential that kids that are coming out of this period that we had 3-4 years ago are going to be stigmatized when they enter the workforce, because in some of our school districts, the expectations have not returned to the level that they were before. You have thoughts about that? Or?
There's certainly a lot of evidence that is, people like to argue, given their ideology, about what happened during COVID and then what the learning loss has been and all of those things. And I think those are useless conversations. What the evidence is showing is that when kids finish high school or leave high school, they're not going to college. And I like to think of higher ed much broader than just a 4-year college, but they're not going to further learning and support, whether it's through an internship or an apprenticeship or whatever. And I just read an article the other day that Gen Z students are being fired in record numbers because they don't have the professionalism and the skill sets they need. And I'm very worried about what you just said about expectations and going back. And instead of saying, let's lower expectations, let's say we're going to keep the expectations high for all students, and we're going to help every student, no matter what that distance is they need to go to get to or exceed that standard. And I just worry that, once again, we're going to whiplash and we're going to go down, down, down. Then all of a sudden somebody will say, the world's falling apart. And then we'll raise them too high without any support system to get back up there. And we'll become the way we used to be. And when I was, in middle school, where they kind of sorted you at 5th or 6th grade and said, you're college material, you're not. You're college material, you're not.
Right.
We can't do that. We can't go back to that. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's what happens when we jerk the expectations around and don't hold them there for every student.
Yeah. As you kind of look at the consulting work you're doing, how do you help new administrators sort of adapt to all these changes and questions and challenges that, whether it be looking at AI or, what is some of the sage advice that you're able to give, given your tenure in this area?
Well, I'd say, first of all, and once again, it's cliche, but it's absolutely true. You have to keep learning every day, all the time. And part of that is being willing to say, I don't know, whether it's to a TV camera or to a crowded boardroom or, to a community meeting. You have to say, well, I don't know. We don't know the answer to that yet. We're working on it, or let's start working on it. And you have to tell the truth as you know it. If you don't know something, you have to say, I don't know. And if you do know something, you have to, as Jim Collins said in Good to Great, you have to confront the brutal facts. And sometimes we know what happens with our folks in social media and in Hollywood and in the politicians' realm. When they're not honest with people, they lose everything eventually. And so being honest and saying, this was a terrible circumstance in one of our schools. It was terrible, should never have happened. And we're going to figure out what happened, why it happened, and we're going to try and mitigate what happened. And we're certainly going to change the environment so it can never happen again, or so that we reduce the chances it will never happen again, and speak directly to people from your head, your heart, and from what you know and don't know. Because there's a lot more we don't know in life than we do know in the great scheme of things, especially in a job like teaching or principaling or superintending.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jack. This has been terrific. How do people find you in terms of your consulting work?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Jack R. Smith. I'm in the state of Maine, and I enjoy doing that work, but I just hope all the folks out there who are working with students today, keep the faith, teach them, help them, support them, and launch them out into the world that they're going into.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. It was a pleasure meeting you and talking with you.
The Ed Leader's Edge podcast is produced by the Journalistic Learning Initiative. Please check out our latest books, Language Arts in Action from W.W. Norton Publishing, and Raising Empowered Learners from Rauman and Littlefield. For more information about our work, please visit journalisticlearning.org or edleaderedge.org. Thanks for listening.